generate image assets from layers. How to generate image assets from layers? You can generate JPG and PNG or GIF image assets from the contents of a layer, by the way, or a layer group in a BSD file. And assets are automatically generated when you append a supported image format extension to a layer name or a layer group name, and optionally you can also specify quality and size parameters for the generated image assets. And generating image assets from a BSD file is particularly useful for multi-device web design. And generate web assets in Photoshop. How to create and generate web graphics with Adobe Generator. Generate image assets from layers or layer groups. To understand the image asset generator better, consider a simple BSD file and download from this link, and with the following layer hierarchy and exampled BSD file and its layer hierarchy. And the layer hierarchy for this file has two layer groups, by the way, rounded rectangles and ellipses, and each of these layer groups contains 5 layers, by the way. And follow these steps now to generate image assets from this BSD file. And number 1, with the BSD file open, select file, then select generate, then choose image assets, and append appropriate file format extensions like JPG or PNG or GIF to the names of the layers or layer groups from which you want to generate image assets. For example, rename the layer group and rounded rectangles and ellipses and as rounded rectangle.jpg and ellipses PNG, and the layer ellipse 4 as ellipse 4.gif. Note and be careful here please now. The special characters and asterisks are not supported in layer names, by the way. And Photoshop generates the image assets and saves them in a subfolder alongside and the source BSD file. If the source BSD file is not saved yet, Photoshop saves the generated assets in a new folder on your desktop. And look at the screenshot now. Image asset names are generated from layer names and layer group names. And image asset generation is enabled, by the way, for the current document. And once enabled, the feature remains available whenever the document is opened next. And in order to disable image asset generation for the current document, deselect file, then choose generate, then image assets. And how to generate multiple assets from the layer or layer group. How to generate multiple assets from a layer or layer group. To generate multiple assets from a layer or layer group, separate the asset names with commas. For example, the following layer name generates 3 assets, by the way, like this example now. And how to save assets to a subfolder. You can also choose to save image assets generated from particular layer and layer groups in a subfolder directly under the Documents Asset folder and include the subfolder name in the layer and layer group name, for example, for this example now. And a web design use case. How to web design use case. Generating image assets from a BSD file is particularly useful for multi-devices web design, and consider the following web design in its layer structure, by the way, like this screenshot now. A web design and its layer hierarchy. And let's extract the icon on top and the top row of the global hotspot image grid as image assets, and append image format extensions to the appropriate layer names, like this screenshot again now. Rename the appropriate layers and layer groups. Note and be careful here now again please. A single image asset is generated from the contents of a layer and layer group, and for example, the adventure logo layer group is in the screenshot above contains a shape layer and a live text layer, and these layers, by the way, are flattened when an image asset is generated from the layer group, and Photoshop generates the assets and saves them in the same location as the source BSD file, like this screenshot now. Generated image assets and specify quality and size parameters. How to specify quality and size parameters? By the way, JPG assets are generated at 90% quality by default, and PNG assets are generated as 32-byte images by default, and the GIF assets are generated with basic alpha transparency, and while remaining layers or layer groups in preparation for asset generation. You can customize quality and size, by the way. And what about parameters for JPG assets? Parameters for JPG assets. You can to add the desired output quality as a suffix to the asset name .jpg or JPG or 1 to 10 or JPG 1 to 100%. For this example now, and add the desired output image size relative or in supported formats like bx and in and cm and mm as a prefix to the asset name, and Photoshop scale the image accordingly, like the example now. And note and be careful again. Remember to add a space character between the prefix and the asset name. If you are specifying the size in pixels, you can omit the unit for this example now, 300x 200, and as illustrated, you can mix different units and pixels while specifying the desired output image size. For example now, for in x 100 rounded rectangle underscore 3.jpg is a valid layer name for asset generation, by the way. And what about parameters for PNG assets? Parameters for PNG assets. You can to add the desired output quality as a suffix to the asset name, like 8 and 24 or 32, for example, ellipse underscore 4.png 24. And you can to add also the desired output image size and relative or is supported formats like px and in and cm and mm, and as prefix to the asset name. Photoshop scale the image accordingly. For this example now, 42 ellipse.png and 300 mm multiply 20 cm rounded rectangle underscore 3.png. And remember that to add a space character between the prefix and asset name. If you are specifying the size in pixels, you can omit the unit, for example 300 multiplied to 200. And as illustrated, you can mix different units and pixels while specifying the desired output image size. For example now, for in x 100 rounded rectangle underscore 3.png, and is a valid layer name for asset generation, by the way. And what about parameters for GIF assets? Parameters for GIF assets. You can add the desired output image size relative or is supported formats like bx and in and cm and mm as a prefix to the asset name, like this example now. And note and be careful. Remember to add a space character between the prefix and asset name. If you are specifying the size in pixels, you can omit the unit, like this example now. And as illustrated, you can mix different units and pixels while specifying the desired output image size, by the way. For example, for in x 100 rounded rectangle 3.gif and is a valid layer name for asset generation, by the way. And the quality parameters are not available, by the way, for GIF assets. Contrast complex layer name. Contrast complex layer name. You can specify multiple asset names with parameters while naming a layer for asset generation, by the way, like this example now. And Photoshop generates the following asset from this layer. And how to specify default setting for assets. How you can to specify default setting for assets. You can specify document wide default setting for the generated assets, by the way, and you have to follow these steps now. Step number 1, create an empty layer in the document, then begin the name of the layer with the keyword default, and now enter the setting that you want to apply to all image assets generated from the document, like this example now. And note and be careful. Default scaling factors are overridden by scaling factors specified for individual layers, by the way. Disable image asset generation for all documents. You can disable image asset generation globally for all Photoshop documents by modifying your preferences, like these steps now. Step number 1, choose edit, then choose preferences, then plugin. And number 2, deselect enable generators. And number 3, click OK. Note that the file generate menus command is unavailable, by the way, when you disable image asset generation from preferences, and this feature can be enabled again only in the preferences dialog box. FAQ here now. We have many questions. Do you need to specify unique asset names? By the way, asset names must be unique at a document level. Next question. What is the default quality level at which image assets are generated? JPG assets are generated at 90% only quality by default, by the way, and PNG assets are generated as 32-bit images by default, and GIF assets are generated with basic alpha transparency. And next question. Does Photoshop generate image assets from layers with transparency and other effects? Yes, exactly yes. Transparency and other effects applied to a layer are reflected, by the way, in the assets generated from the layer. However, such effects may be flattened in the generated assets. Next question. How are image assets generated from layers that bleed off the canvas? Assets, by the way, are clipped to the document boundaries. If an image doesn't fall within the document boundaries, generator doesn't create the associated image assets, by the way. And is the comma the only permitted separator between image asset names? In addition to the comma, you can use the plus symbol as a separator between image asset names, and for this example now, you have to see this example now.